Hi, hello students. We're going to be working with Tutorial 5 in the Microsoft Excel course. This is working with the Excel tables, pivot tables, and pivot charts. This is starting on page EX 257. This is a wonderful chapter and excellent information. The pivot tables and pivot charts lead into the power pivot that we'll be working on in chapter 11. The pivot tables, pivot charts are something that I used, especially as a teacher in the past, often, nearly every week. They are wonderful, excellent tools to be accomplished. All right, to get us started, let's take a look at the key terms that we're working with this week. All right, we have ascending order. We have category field, clear, criteria filter, column header, custom list, data definition table, descending order, Excel table, a field name, a filter, freeze, header row, pane, descending order, pivot chart, pivot table, primary sort field, record, refresh, secondary sort field, slicer, sort field, split bar, table style, total roll, and value field. All right, you should be looking through these, making sure you understand what the key terms are, because we're going to be using those a tremendous amount. All right, let's check out our rubric for the assignment that I'm going to work on as the tutorial. You can see there are 45 points to this tutorial. We have the cash receipts January workbook. Your final assignment to what you should be turning into me is the cash receipts January workbook. As always, make sure you're checking your assignment that you turn in against the rubric, making sure that you're hitting each piece of this assignment. Getting into our PowerPoint presentation. This is working with the Excel tables, pivot tables, and pivot charts in the New Perspective books. This is the Tutorial 5 or Assignment 5 on Blackboard. Alright, we got some objectives here. We're going to explore a structured range of data. We're going to freeze rows and columns. We're going to plan and create an Excel table. We're going to rename and format an Excel table. We're going to add, edit, delete records in a table. We're going to sort the data in the ascending and descending order. We're going to filter data using our filter buttons. We're going to filter a table with a slicer. We're going to insert a total row to summarize a table. We're going to split a worksheet into two panes. We're going to insert subtotals into a range of data. We're going to use the outline buttons to show or hide. We're going to create and modify a pivot table, apply a pivot table style and formatting, filter the pivot table, insert a slicer to filter the pivot table, and insert a recommended pivot table, and create a pivot chart. As always, there are some visual elements that we need to be looking at. Every Excel table has a name. You can see the name underneath the file, table name. The filter button is a drop-down menu. It allows you to filter the information out. The first rows are going to be the header. Each row, each individual item is called a record. And you can sort based on ascending or descending order. Underneath Table Tools Design, we have a Table Styles button that we're going to be utilizing. We're going to be modifying field names, our column headers, and all the records in the table are called the Excel table itself. When we're planning a structured range of data, a collection of similar data can be structured in a range of columns and rows representing fields and records respectively. Each column represents a field which is a single piece of data. Each row represents a record, which is a group of related fields. Remember the columns, up, down, rows, left, right. So our column might be age, or records might be Jim Bob, who is 18 years old. A structured range of data is commonly referred to as a list or table. When we're planning our structured range, the data definition table document lists the fields to be maintained for each record and description of the information for each we're going to include. So we have the field, the description, the data type, and the notes. So We have debt, the cashier's receipt, date, transaction date. Common operations for working with data are the add, edit, and delete data in the range. We're going to sort the data, filter the data to only show a few certain things, or many depending on what we're filtering it to. We're going to insert formulas to calculate subtotals, and we're going to create summary tables based on data in the usual range, usually with pivot tables. Okay. We're going to create an effective structured range of data using the entered field names in the top row of the range. Use short descriptive field names. We don't want a field name that is 15 words long. We would like things that see are just 1, maybe 2 words, 3 at most. We're going to format field names to distinguish header rows from the data. And we're going to insert the same kind of data in a field. We're going to separate the data, including the header row, from other information in the worksheet by at least 1 blank row and 1 blank column. Freezing is a unique thing that allows us to keep the header row visible no matter when we are showing the data. So we can scroll around the data without just removing on this training date, day, week, segment, amount. That is our header row. So you'd be able to scroll this data or these records up or down and always see the headers. Excel tables make it easier to identify, manage, and analyze the group's related data. When a structured range of data is converted into Excel table, you see the following: a filter button, a range formatted with table style, a sizing handle, and a table tools design tab in the ribbon. So when we have a table, our table tools design tab appears. We can have a tab styles, we can filter buttons to start appearing in the header rows, and we can header row replace the column headings. So instead of it being column A, B, C, D, E, F, it could be named those actual header rows. Quick shortcuts are using your table style. Just like in several of the other assignments, Excel has built-in styles that you can apply. I believe there are 52 of them. So you can quickly modify using the table style. You can expand or add new rows and columns automatically. You can add a total roll to the calculate function, sum, average, count, min, max, any of those type of things you want. We can enter a formula in a cell and have it automatically copied to all the other cells in the column, and we can create formulas that reference cells in table by table and column names. We can also rename an Excel table. Remember, in the top left-hand corner, all tables have a name. Descriptive names on the tables make it easier to reference the table if you're skipping information between the different worksheets inside of a workbook, or if you're using multiple workbooks that are intersecting and grabbing information from each other. Table names must start with a letter or an underscore, but it can use any combination of letters, numbers, or underscores for the rest of the name. But they cannot include spaces. To modify an Excel table, we can modify by adding or removing table elements or by changing the table's formatting. You can display or hide the following: the header row, the total row, the first or last column, the banded rows, the banded columns, or the filter button. As you develop a worksheet with an Excel table, you will need to add new records to the table, edit existing records on the table, and delete records. So if we have a new student come into our student database, you may have to add the new student. If a student left, you'd have to remove that student. If the student gets adopted, you may have to change his name. When we add records, we add a record in the first blank row, and we add a record in the specific location by inserting a row within the table for the new record. When we're editing, you can manually scroll through the table to find the specific record, but if you're looking at records of thousands, the quicker way to locate it is to use the find command. When using the find or replace command, it's best to start at the top of the worksheet to ensure that all cells are being searched. Make sure you realize there's a big difference between find and replace. Find just locates it and puts it on your screen. Replace finds it and replaces it with something else that you have decided. There are 3 ways to delete records. We can either select each record independently, click it, click the delete button. You can click and delete an entire field by selecting a cell in the field you want to delete and clicking the delete button arrow and clicking the delete total table column. You can use the remove duplicates dialog box to locate and remove records that have the same data in selected columns. The remove duplicates is an incredible tool and will be extremely helpful to you. And the remove duplicates dialog box is going to be values, and all the selected columns must be equal for the row to be considered a duplicate. So we select all these, and we have, if it's the exact same for all these selected, we can hit OK, and it will find the duplicates and then remove them. Now when we come to sorting data, sorting means we can sort ascending or descending. Ascending puts it in alphabetical order from A to Z, or numbers from the smallest to the largest order. Descending order puts it from Z to A, or from the largest numbers to the smallest numbers. Dates work the same way. Oldest numbers to biggest, newest numbers to smallest, or oldest. We can sort a single column by using the sort buttons up top, the sort icon button filter on the row header itself, and that will modify the data or the records inside the table and sort them by whatever section we have chosen. We can sort multiple columns using sort dialog box, and we have a primary and secondary. So maybe we want to sort by date, and we want to find all the records from June 6th. And then after we find all the records, we want to sort by hours worked if we're working on a hourly wage sheet, and find everyone that works 6 hours. So we can sort by multiple things in any single table. You can use up to 64 sort fields. On the sort fields, remember that they go in order. It starts by your primary, then goes to the secondary, and then goes to whatever you've listed below that. So make sure you have them in the correct order when you're sorting. Our secondary sort field, a primary sort field, and tritary sort field. You can sort by multiple levels here. You can see I sorted by training date, then by segment, then by amount. You can also sort using custom lists. You can predefine day of the week custom list, month of the year custom list. You can create custom lists to sort records in a sequence that you have even defined. To do that, you use the custom list dialog box. The filtering table data is pretty straightforward. You can convert items to ranges and then sort everything depending on how you want. Filtering does not delete, it only hides. So when we filter an item, it only hides the records that we're not wanting to find, and then shows us the ones we have filtered by. After it's filtered, it can be sorted, copied, formatted, charted, and printed. So you can use ascending, descending, the custom sorting even after a filtered data. Filtering using one column, we can click the filter button, open it up, use the auto filter menu to create 3 types of filters: by cell color, font color, by specific text number or date, or by selecting exact values. So if you change the color in the cells, you can actually sort by color, you can sort by date, you can sort by numbers, or whatever you want to filter by. Sorry, I said sort, I meant filter. We can even filter using multiple columns. Much like the sort, we have a primary filter, then a secondary filter. To clear filters, to redisplay all data in the filter table, clear or remove the filters. When one filter is cleared from the column, all other filters are still applied. So if you only clear one, that doesn't mean you're clearing all of them. We can also select multiple filter items using the OR condition. requires that only one of these selected criteria be true for the record to display. So we can filter by age and date, and if either one of those things is true, like we're looking for, it will show that condition. We can do criteria filters to get even more specific and more advanced. The types of criteria filters jump to the page here, hold on. This criteria filters use the OR command, and we select the criteria for true for more than one record. Here we go. We'll go back to the slides. The type of criteria filter is available to change depending on whether the data in the column contains text, numbers, or dates. So if you choose a criteria filter on a column that has numbers, it's going to have a different set of criteria filters available than if you choose one that has words. Alright, for our filtering data, text we can do equals, does not equals, begins with, ends with, contains, or does not contain. For numbers, we can do equals, greater than or equal to, less than, between, top 10, or above average. For the date, we can do today, last week, next month, last quarter, year to date, or last year. In our filtering data, you can see where we choose the logical operators being used, greater than, less than, equal to, those type of things, and the criteria that you have chosen for the first condition to be met. You can also add second conditions and whatnot. Now, to create a slicer to filter data in an Excel table, you can create one or more slicers to filter a table. Every slicer consists of an object that contains a button for unique value in that field. An advantage of a slicer clearly shows what filters are currently applied. The disadvantage is a slicer can take up a lot of space or hide data if there isn't a big enough blank area near the table. You can format the slicer and its buttons, changing its style, height, and width. Alright, so we have button to clear the current filter. Orange button values are indicated in the filter. Gray buttons are not included in the filter. This is a slicer. Icons show that the column is filtered. Filter table shows only weeks 1 through 5. You can see 1 through 5, 1 through 5. Now, a total row is typically applied at the end of your tables. It's used to calculate summary statistics, sums, average, counts, maximums and minimums, or whatever the statistics you are needing for any given column in that table. We can use total row to calculate summary statistics such as average, count numbers, maximums, those type of items. To split your worksheet into 2 panes, we can easily view several areas of the worksheet at the same time. To split into 2 planes, you're going to split the Windows panes. It's underneath your View tab on your ribbon, top, split. And then the divide bar comes down below, and you can divide it to however you want. Subtotals offer a lot of different types of summary information. We can insert a subtotal row into a range for each group of the data. We can add a grand total row below last row of data and cannot be used in an Excel table. You must first convert the Excel table to a normal range. So if you're working in a table and you want to use a subtotal command, you need to convert this table to a normal range. There is a subtotal outline view. It controls the level of details with buttons. Level 3 is the most detailed. Level 2, subtotals and grand totals, but not individual records. Level 1 is only the grand totals. Now the fun part, pivot tables and pivot charts. I absolutely love using pivot tables and pivot charts. It allows me to create a lot of unique data very quickly. Now, the pivot table uses the data from the segment field as a column titles. So we have the segment field, you can see column titles. The pivot table is an interactive table used to group and summarize either a range of data or an Excel table into a concise and tabular format for reporting and analysis. This is just a visual overview of the pivot table fields, how it's sorted. When a table contains large amounts of data, it often becomes difficult to obtain clear view. So if you have a data with thousands of records in it, it will be very difficult to use your total row, create the own independent graphs and functions. You're going to want to use a pivot table. Pivot tables help organize data by summarizing data using functions such as count, sum, average, maximum, min. Providing ability to pivot the table or rearrange, hide, and display different category fields to provide alternate views of the data. So what that pivot means is I can modify the table quickly and easily to show me a tremendous amount of different data in different graphs. Pivot table has a pretty unique layout. So when you're working with the pivot table, make sure you're using the correct pivot table layout. We're going to use the pivot table dialog box to select data to analyze and location the pivot table report. And we're going to location for the pivot table is going to be in a new worksheet by itself. You can create it in the existing worksheet. I tend to put my pivot tables by themselves, simply because I can then hide that extraneous data from the person and only show them the graphs I've created from the pivot tables. You can't add fields to a pivot table. They contain summary data. Fields are grouped. The values in the pivot table are categorical fields. We can add fields to a pivot table from the pivot table field pane, which is divided into two sections. The upper section, or the field section, lists the names of each field in the data source. And the selective field checkbox will drag the fields in the lower section to add the filters, rows, columns, and values area. Our layout of the pivot table is rows, columns, filters, and values. Rows fields place the area appear as a row label. Columns field place the area appear as the column label. The filters fields placed in this area appear to top level filters above the pivot table, and values place the area of the numbers that are summarized in the pivot table. Changing the layout of a pivot table, you can add, remove, or rearrange fields to change the pivot table's layout. After you create a pivot table, you can view the same data in many different ways. Each time you make a change in this area section of the pivot table fields pane, the pivot table layout is rearranged. Of course, much like with everything else in Excel, you can use one of the pre-created themes and styles to quickly modify this. And with pivot tables, you can even filter a pivot table. That is done using the pivot table fields. Right hand side, you can choose what you filter. Filtering pivot tables adds another way to filter items is using the filter menu. We can open up the row labels button and check or uncheck items to show or hide them. Right, we can also use a slicer to filter a pivot table. So the pivot table works much like the sort and a whole lot like the filter buttons on before, where we can use slicers. You can sort by columns, data, whatever you need. We can create slicer from any field of the pivot table fields pane. The slicer contains a button for each unique value, its style, height, and width. You can create more than one slicer at any given time. And you can see underneath the slicer tools option, we can choose selected slicer style, new slicer sizes, and the selected slicer buttons. You cannot change data directly in a pivot table. You must edit the data source on which the pivot table is created. Make sure that this is really beaten to your skull. No matter what, if you try to change a pivot table itself, it's not going to modify. You have to modify the data that it is connected to. Pivot tables are not updated automatically when the source data for the pivot table is updated. You have to manually refresh them after you've updated the data. You can use a recommended pivot table once you've selected your data you wanted. The recommended pivot table is a great feature and will show you how they think you should format it. Now, a pivot chart is a graphic representation of the pivot table. To me, these goes directly hand in hand. The only reason I ever use a pivot table is because I want to create pivot charts. Now, this allows you to add interactive, add, remove filters, and refresh data fields. And we can add pivot table charts that have all the same formatting as other charts, including layouts and styles. And you can move and resize charts just like you could outside the pivot charts. So a pivot chart works the exact same way as a regular chart, except now it's attached to a pivot table. Pivot chart based on the pivot table's data. We can chart filter buttons. The pivot chart tool's contextual tabs enable you to work with and format the selected pivot chart the same way as an ordinary chart. A pivot chart and its associated pivot tables are linked, so when you modify one, you also change the others. You can quickly display different views on the pivot chart by using the chart filter buttons on the pivot chart to filter the data. And so the big thing is to remember, the pivot chart is hooked to the pivot table. The pivot table is hooked to your data. To change any of them, you need to change your data, to change the pivot table, to change the pivot chart. Alright, that's it for our PowerPoint presentation. And I'm now going to start working on the tutorial on page 257, or EX 257. So if you will, turn to your books, and we're going to be working on Lori's Coffee House. Now, I have already come up and downloaded my student data files and whatnot for Lori's Coffee House so that I don't have to go into Blackboard and get them. At this point, we're on Chapter 5. You should be fully capable of downloading your student work files from the internet. Alright, so the table or chart we're going to be working with, or the workbook, is the January workbook. So let's just go ahead and open that up. And of course, before I ever start a assignment, I always want to check the rubric. So we know we're going to be working and turning in cash receipts for January, and it's worth 45 points. Alright, we have opened up Lori's Coffee House. We see we're starting off with two worksheets, cash receipts and documentation. I know the documentation is always going to be my name and today's date. So let's start working through. It looks like Lori is wanting to find out what's working best for her brand new coffee shop and help her start with the ordering of data, or ordering of materials and staffing decisions. She's entered the January cash receipts data into the Excel workbook and has asked us to help her analyze the data. So we're going to be working with pivot tables, pivot charts, subtotals, totals, and changing headers, and all those type of fun things. Alright, on section or page EX 258 and 259, I see an overview of what I should be looking at and what each section is named. I can see in cash receipts tab that we're going to be creating a table based on this, and this table is going to be January data. I can see my field header row down, or column. Sorry, I can see my header row, what its dates are going to be. I can even see my records and the formatting for that. So my end goal for this first section is to make my page look like EX 258 and EX 259. That looks like our first steps come on page EX 262. We're going to open up the January workbook and save it as cash receipts January. As always, I like to use my desktop. It's just personal preference. That's close enough. Alright, in the document sheet we're going to add our name in cell B3 and B4, which we've already done because I know that I'm going to do that every time. In the range A7 to D13, we're going to review the data definition tables. So A7 to D13, we're going to go over this and make sure that we know what's what. TRN date is the day of the cash receipts, day is the day of the week numbers are the week of the year, segment is our business category for the cash receipts, amount is the cash receipts total for the specific transaction, date and segment. Date is going to be in the 224 format. Text is going to be Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, so that's days of the week. Numbers 1 through 52. The second text is coffee, spec, drink, food, and gifts. And our numbers use the accounting format and show 2 decimal places. So make sure you remember 2 decimal places. Next, we're going into our cash receipts worksheet. The worksheet, which was shown in Figure 5.1, contains data about the coffee house's cash receipts. Currently, the worksheets include 121 cash receipts. So she has sold 121 items at this point. You can see it's 122 because it does have category names up top. Okay. Each cash receipt record is separate in rows 2 through 122. Contain 5 fields, columns A through E. Row 1, the header row, contains labeling that describes the data in each column. Now, until they want me to, on step 5, to go scroll down, and you can see I can't see the column headers anymore. And so it makes it difficult to figure out what this data is I'm looking at by the time I get below. So we're going to freeze this first row of data, or first categories, are the header titles. Again, I trip over my words. It happens when you talk all day long. Alright, so we're going to push the Control Home button. That way we're in the top left, A1 square. So no matter where we are in our workbook, if I accidentally come out into nowhere man's land, I can hit Control Home and be back at A1. On the Control Home keys, turn to cell A1. On the View tab, in the Windows group, we're going to click the Freeze Panes button. So we have the Windows group, and we're going to do a Freeze Pane. And you see I did the drop-down menu. And we're going to freeze the top row. Now what this has done from here on out, when I scroll down, my category views on top don't move. So it does not matter if I'm at the top or the bottom. I can see that this is trend date, day, week, segment, amount. Go back to Control Home. Now Control Home is A2 because A1 is frozen. To unfreeze the top row in the worksheet, on the View tab in the Windows group, we can unfreeze. You can see the dark horizontal line is gone, and now if you can hit Control Home, A1 is back to active. Our next step is to convert this range of data into a table so that we can start doing things like filtering and sorting in the pivot tables and pivot charts. So we're going to go up to the Insert tab on our ribbon, and we're going to insert a table button. We're going to choose our range, which it pretty much guessed it for me at this point, and say yes, my table has headers, because it does. You can see that immediately converted this range of data to a nice pretty table. It gave you your drop-down menu so that you can do your sorts and filters. We can now choose table styles, and the Table Tools design menu came up on our ribbon. Okay. And with this, since it's a table, since it's a table, we no longer need to freeze the top row. You can see it's an A1 right now, we have the column or category titles. If we scroll down, they jump up and show now that the column titles are now those headers. So no need to freeze that first row. Go back to Control H, Control Home, and yeah, go to that first cell. All right, we're going to next rename this table. So every table has a unique name. And underneath Table Tools Design on the left-hand side, you can see that unique name. This one is called Table 1. That is pretty nondescript. So I want to change this unique name to January Data. And remember that table names can have to start with either a underscore or a letter. And any letters can be any number of letters or underscores after that, but it cannot contain spaces. So we have January Data is our table name. Hit your Enter key, and we're good to go. From the Table Design tool, you can now see that's stayed. All right, on page EX267, we're going to format the January Data table. All right, on the Table Tools Design tab in your ribbon, we're going to choose this Table Styles group and click on the More button. And we are wanting the Table Style Medium 3. In the Table Style Options group, click on the banded rows. And you can see that table styles have disappeared for that alternating color. It makes it a lot harder to read. So let's go ahead and get rid of that and put it back to having non-banded rows. This alternates the row color, makes it a bit easier to read. And we're going to change the columns A through E to 12 characters. And I'm going to do it by just dragging my stuff out. There we go. So A3 is 12 characters. The column headers and all values are now visible, which they are. Select the amount column and change this to ascending order, or change the values to accounting. So the number style is going to be an accounting. Now this was done on the Home tab. You could also right-clicked and formatted it to change it. And let's go back to our home. Alright, we're on to page EX268, and we're going to start to add 4 records to the January table. Now remember, we add records at the first blank line on the table. So let's come down here to the first blank line. There we go. You can also hit end and down arrow, and it will take you to the last piece in the table. And then then we're going to hit cell A123, type 131,216. And you can see it automatically dragged the table formatting down 1 level. Alright, let's enter the rest of this data. Now, so we've added the data in on cells 123, 124, and 125. The Sunday, 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 food, coffee, specialty, drink. So there should be 4 new records altogether. Alright, next we're going to find and edit a record. So something in this big table of 125 records is something that is either wrong or inappropriate. So Control H, go back to our Home button, our home screen, our starting cell, and we're going to do the Find and Select. So on the Home tab in your ribbon, Find and Select top right, and then we're going to click on the Find button, which brings up the Find or Replace dialog box. Now remember the difference between find and replace. Find just locates it, replace locates it and turns it into something else that you have chosen. In the find box we're going to type in 120 2016 and find next. So here's 120 2016 for food 262. And we're going to find next 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Alright, close this and we're going to hit the tab button 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to change this from 144.97. I'm sorry. Here I hit the button one few times. We're going to put in 154.25. Alright, control home. We're on to page EX270, deleting a record. Deleting a record is pretty easy. So we're going to scroll to row 64. And on the ribbon, click on the Table Tools Design tab. And we're going to try to remove a duplicate by using the Remove Duplicates button. So up here on row 64, we're going to remove duplicates. And so our dialog box pops up and we want something that matches a duplicate of every single thing. Hit OK. There is 1 duplicate removed. Hit OK. The next step is going to be sorting the data. Alright, to sort the data, we're going to go to the January data table, which we're already here. It's in our cash receipts worksheet. And we're going to go up to the data tab on your ribbon. And we have either filter or sort, depending on what we're doing, and even some quick options here of ascending or descending order. And we're going to sort A to Z button. So we should have chosen our A1 button, sort A to Z. Now we want to sort it by the segment. So choose any cell in the segment and then sort A to Z. So you now see it listed all coffees together, all foods together, all gifts, and then specialty drinks. If you did something wrong and you click sort and let's see, and it doesn't look like that, it more than likely means that you had selected a cell that was not in the segment section. So make sure you've checked segment and sorted it there. Okay, we're going to use a predefined custom list to sort the day column now. So click on the day column, any cell in the column works, and we're going to make the active cells the January table. On the data tab, we're going to sort and filter the group using the sort button. And then we're going to sort this using a predefined custom list. And in the custom list box, we're going to use Monday, Tuesday, sort button, segment, values, custom list. And then the custom list, we're going to choose Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, right here. So we have a predefined list. Hit OK. OK. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So we sorted it by alphabetical first, and then we have secondary sort by the days of the week. In your textbook for the second section on page EX276 and EX277, we have a visual overview of what we will end with. So we're looking at all the things that we're going to be creating. It looks like we're doing some pivot tables, pivot charts. We're going to doing a slicer. We're going to do a split bar, total rows, like all kinds of fun and excellent stuff here. We're going to do some filtering instead of sorting. So on page EX278, let's begin with our filter. So we're going to go click on the segment section, And we're going to filter this, and we're going to filter it. How are we filtering it? And we're going to select all. Okay, all of them are already selected. So we're filtering it. We hit select all, and we're going to reselect food, so it's just food and not everything. Hit OK, and what you should see now is your table is filtered only down to the ones that had food. This is very different than the sort who just puts them in order. Next, we're going to filter out which food items were purchased on Saturday. Let's come over here to the day, do our filter, select all, and we want just Saturday. Hit OK. So we should be seeing 5 records at this point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Alright, next thing we're going to do is clear these filters out. So you can see on your tab, we have the drop down, darker colored with a filter icon on it, darker colored with a filter icon. The up equals food, here equals Saturday. So we're going to clear these filters off. Let's just go ahead and select all again, and select all. So now we have no more filters on this. Next, we're going to select multiple filter items. So click on the segment filter button and hit select all. We can also add multiple levels to here. So we want coffee and specialty drinks. You can see now that I have coffees and specialty drinks and nothing else, no foodstuffs. And our status bar should recognize that we are looking at 62 of 124 records. Our next step is start working with a number filter that shows cash receipts that are greater than $300. So on the greater than custom, we're going to come over here to amount. We still want only the coffee and specialty drinks, and we're going to change our filtering to greater than $300. Now you could have chosen to make this greater than or equal to, so it would be $300 and up. We want numbers that were just greater than $300. You can then, after you've filtered it, we can sort this field. So say we want to just print this one off. We want to filter this by the date here, and we're going to sort largest to smallest. So underneath data, largest to smallest. And we want an amount, and we want to sort that largest to smallest. There we go. That's more like it. So our biggest drink, special drink, is $454 to $305. Now we want to clear all these. So on the ribbon tab, click the data tab, and then click in the sort and filter group, the clear. That takes off all of our filters and everything, so we can start again. We're now going to create our first slicer for this table. Alright, so on the Table Tools Design tab, I'm going to come over here to the Tools group and click the Insert Slicer button. Tools group, Insert Slicer. And we're going to click the week number and hit OK. So this is in a quick filterability, so I can sort by week 1 and 2, week 4, week 5, week 6. By just hitting a button, I can quickly sort this field. We can also modify this under the slicer options. And we want to put this in the G1. And remember, I've moved Alt key and mouse to put into G1. Alright. So G1. Yeah, let's modify the size of this, and we're going to modify the height. And remember, this is underneath the Slicer Tools option to 2.2. And 1 in the width. And for our slicer style, we want a more style, and we want slicer style dark too. So I'm going to match the formatting of the table pretty well. Okay. I can select my multiple or a single. If I want multiple filters, I can hold down my shift button and choose them on my slicer. I can clear what I've chosen to filter by using the Alt C or the clear button. And so we want to clear or filter this using the slicer and click on the 1 button. You can see that it made it show only these. And we're going to click Control and hit the 5 button. So now it should show 1 and 5. You can see in the week numbers 1 and 5. And to clear, top right corner, hit clear or Control C. Or Alt C, I'm sorry, Control C is copy. Alt C. Now we're done with our first slicer. The next step is we're going to start using some calculations and do a total row to calculate summary statistics. So make sure your filters are all cleared and we have a good table setting here. And so to add a total row to the sum of the amount column and count the day column. So on the ribbon, click on Table Tools Design tab, and we're going to insert a total row. Next, we're going to use a count function. Okay, in cell B126, which is actually cell B125, we're going to use our drop-down menu, and we're going to use the More Functions. And here, click on the count, and hit OK. Now you should see it shows 124 cells, or 124 records, sorry. Alright, next we're going to filter cash receipts by excluding receipts from week 1 and week 6. So hit our Control Home button, and on the slicer choose 2, 3, 4, and 5. 2, Control 3, 4, and 5. You can see our total row comes down to 22,225, and we have 112 records. Right. Next, we're going to split these cash receipt worksheets window into panes. A pane is just a split screen. So hit your Control Home, go back to A1, go into your View tab in your ribbon, and we're going to go choose to split. And we can choose a unique split and place the split where we want it. We're going to select a cell in column A that is the 2 rows above the last visible on your screen. So it looks like our split should be between 22 and 23. Modify that a little bit, dragging it around. And our vertical split should be just to the left of the scroll bar. You now see that we have 2 splits. Actually, I have 4. Okay, class, I made a simple mistake. We wanted to split this between 22 and 23. So I'm going to click on 22 and then click on split. And then you should see that we have 2 screens. Now what I did before and what caused my error is instead of clicking on the row, I clicked on a center cell. When I went split, it split everything based on that cell. So I actually had 4 screens. If you click on a column and split, you'll have 2 screens that are separate columns. So make sure you're clicking on the correct place when you split. Between 22 and 23, let's do our split. And she wants to see the total down there. Okay. Now we're going to update the amount of coffee receipts on 1/28/2016. Select any cell in the top pane. Use your find command to locate 1/28/2016. Yep. Find 1/28/2016. Alright, so I got 1/28/2016 Thursday 5 coffee for $144.60. On the amount column, I'm going to change it to $244.60. And our bottom pane window should update to 22/3/25, which it did. Alright, we want to remove that split screen now and make it easier, so just come up here to your view and click on the split screen button. Next, we're going to hide the total row and clear the filter from the January data. So on the Table Tool Design button, make sure your table is selected. I'm going to unselect the total row and press the Control Home, get back into A1, and clear the filter. So now I have everything showing, everything there's supposed to be, and no total row. I'm on to page EX293. We're going to sort the cash receipts and convert the table to a range. Alright, so we're going over to the TRN date. We're going to do our filter, and we're going to sort by, looks like, oldest to newest. I sorted newest to oldest. Oldest to newest. There we go. Alright, make sure that you have sorted it before we convert this to a range. So I'll walk through that one more time. Under the TRN date, down menu, sort oldest to newest, hit OK. You can see it's filtered or sorted there by the menu. On the Table Tool Design tab, we're going to go to the Tools group, and we are going to convert to range. And yes, we want to convert to a range. Our table is now a range. And you notice when I'm clicking on it, my table tool design tab is no longer showing up. To calculate the cash receipts amount subtotals for each date, on the ribbon, click the Data tab. And on the outline group, click the Subtitle button. Okay. Make sure you've selected your range before you hit that button. Alright, subtitle and subtitle box open, see figure 528. And we're going to click on the amount and remove all. Okay. Now what you should see here now is your outline buttons appearing on your left, new rows with the subtitles added below each TRN date, and new rows with the grand total at the end of each table. So we have TRN date, total, TRN date, total, and this is all the way through. Next we're going to use the subtotal outline view, and we're going to hide some records. So we're going to click on the level 2 outline. We're going to click the Show Details button on the left of 1/31/2016. 1/31/2016. And expand the outline. Then on the level 1 outline button, the individual cash receipts records and the subtitles for each TRN date are hidden. Click on level 3. Scroll up. All the records along with the subtitles and the grand totals are available at this point now. Next, I'm going to show you how to remove the subtitles from the cash receipts data. On the Data tab, we are going to click on the Remove All button. So we're in the Data tab in the Outline group. We're going to click on the Subtotal, and then we're going to remove all. Let's see, where is that wonderful Remove All? There we go. This resets the worksheet back to its original. Now let's convert this document or these records back into a table. So click on somewhere in the range, go back into your Insert tab, and then we're going to go back to our table and just create this. Yes, my table has headers. So we're back into a table that we can filter, edit, pivot, chart, all those wonderful things. And once we select it, make sure, yep, you can see it named it incorrectly again, so let's make sure we go back through and rename it our correct thing. January data. Enter. We're on to section 5.3. We're on page AX 298 and 299. Looks like now we're going to be doing some pivot charts and pivot tables. Well, we're on to page EX 301, and we're going to be starting to create our pivot tables and pivot charts. To create a pivot table, it's going to be your Insert tab. So make sure you select your table, go to your Insert tab, and then we're going to go to Pivot Table. And our pivot table dialog box should open, and we're going to make sure we select the table or range that data table or our January table appears in. Okay. And we're going to want to create this in a new worksheet. Okay, so we have our sheet 1, which is our new data table. or pivot table. And we're going to add some pivot table fields here. You can see we have our pivot table name on the left hand side. We have a pivot table report area, which is going to show us what we've customized. We have the pivot table fields pane. We have the fields column in the January table, and the 4 areas that represent the pivot table layout. Now the 4 areas of the pivot table layout are rows, columns, filters, and values. Rows fields place the area to appear as row labels. Columns fields place the area to display as column labels. Filters place the area so that to your top levels above the pivot table, and values are place the area of the numbers that are summarized in the pivot table. So let's add a new field to the pivot table. In the pivot field pane, drag week number from the upper section to the rows area. So we want week to be a row. You can see our pivot table is already modifying. And our week fields 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 should appear. Okay. In our values, we have the sum. Let's see. Right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to drag the amount and click the amount checkbox. And you can see that becomes into values of sum of amount. The train date. You can see that modifies the pivot table B by the train date. And we're going to next click on the segment. Right, let's modify some layout of this pivot table. We're going to click segment and we're going to drag it to our columns. You can always see that the pivot table will modify depending on what you've done. Alright, next we're going to start formatting this pivot table so it's a little bit better looking. And we're going to modify this. First off, make sure the active cells is in the pivot table somewhere. So click somewhere in the pivot table. And then come up here to the pivot table and design tab. And we're going to drop down our more. And we're going to choose pivot style medium 10. Then we're going to format the amount field in the pivot table as a currency. So we're going to click on the value field. And we're going to modify this field settings. And we're going to change this over to a currency. All right. And custom name, we're going to name this total cash receipts. Click the number format button. And we're going to change this over to a currency. Currency, of course, has 2 digits decimal. Hit OK, OK, and now you can see our totals are in dollar values. We're going to add a week numbered field to the filters area. So come over here, and we've got week numbers. We're going to drag this over to filters. So now we can filter this pivot table based on what week. So you should see week number and filters, segment and columns, TRN date and rows, and total cash in values. And it should show up here week number all as by default. Next, we're going to want to summarize the filter report to show only cash receipts for week 2. So on cell B1, we can click on the all and just choose 2 and hit OK. Now you can see that this is going to modify everything down just to that week 2. All right, next we're going to go down here to the column labels filter, and we're going to click on GIFs. And hit OK. So we're going to filter this down to everything but the GIFs. Our next step is to create a nice little slicer for this pivot table. So on the ribbon, click the Pivot Table Tools and Analyze, and we're going to insert slicer. Make sure you've clicked on the week number, then insert slicer. Okay. On the slicer tool option, we're going to week number. Okay. Alright, so let me go back through that real quick. Let's close this. I'm going to Control Z until it goes away. Alright, so we come down here, we filtered, we got rid of GIFs, we've hit OK, we chose A1, came to Pivot Table, Analyze, Insert Slicer, we want week numbers, hit OK. You can see the only one highlighted is number 2, because that is the only one we're working with at this point. Alright, on the Slicer Tool Options tab, we're going to modify this to be a 2.2 and a 1 inch, so 2.2 high, 1 inch wide. We're going to go to the More Design, and we're going to choose the design of Slicer Style Dark 2. And we're going to move it to the corner of G3, which I believe is right there. And I'm in corner of G2, so I'm just going to drag it down one more. I had to filter this using the week 1 slicer. Hit the Control button and click the 3 button. So now we're filtering it by week 2 and week 3. You can also do it by week 4 and week 5. And do it by the week 3, 4, and 5. Alright, next we're going to hide the pivot table fields pane and rename the pivot table in Worksheet. So we're going to click on any of the active cells of the pivot table. We're going to go up here to the Pivot Tools, Analyze, and you can see the pivot table name is in the top left side. And in the Show group, we're going to click on the Field List button. So we've got the Show group and the Field List button. Now you can see that changes on the right hand side and gets rid of your pivot table field. You can also bring it up quickly. So if you're trying to bring that back up, you've accidentally closed it, so you've hit the X, you can't figure out how to bring it back up, the Show button, Field List. And let's get rid of that. In the Show group, click the Field List, get rid of that. Then we're going to change the name to Weekly Summary. Remember that pivot table names cannot have spaces. They can have letters and numbers and symbols, but it must start with either a letter or an underscore. And we're going to rename this worksheet to Weekly Summary Pivot Table. Now you should be showing just week 2. Next we're going to update the January data table and refresh the pivot tables. So in the January data, remember to change a pivot table, you have to change the data that the pivot table came from. You can never add, I don't know why that didn't modify that. Let's fix that again. Weekly summary. There we go. Bothers me. Again, sometimes my mouse screws up. I got to change my mouse out. Sometimes you want to change the information on the pivot table. I want to add a record. I cannot add records using a pivot table. I have to go to the data the pivot table came from. To do that, I'm going to come over here to my cash receipts and specifically to my January data table. And I'm going to go to the cash receipts worksheet. We're going to find the food cash receipts for 1/4/2016 in the amount of $309.66. So I'm going to find, and I'm going to search for 1/4/2016. Hit find next, and they had one that was for 409.60 or 309.66. There you go. Next, we're going to change this number from 409 or 309 to 409. Now, we can see our numbers haven't changed here. We have to refresh these pivot tables. So to refresh the pivot table, we click anywhere on the pivot table. Come up here, go to Pivot Table, Analyze, and we're going to hit the refresh in the data group. And you can see that our grand total changed. Now your refresh data should be 4879.44. Alright, so now we're going to go into Excel and let Excel try to recommend some pivot tables to us for the data that we're going to select. So we're going to create a recommended pivot table. So go to the cash receipts worksheet. And we're going to go into the Insert tab, and we're going to insert a pivot table. We're going to insert a recommended pivot table. And it gives you a preview of what the pivot table is going to look like. We're going to click on the sum amount by day, the fourth pivot table in the left pane, and then we're going to hit OK. So that added a new sheet with a new pivot table. It already sorted everything, so we have a nice little pivot table here. On your right hand side, the pivot table fields, we're going to be looking for the number format button. So in the sum of amount button, we're going to go over here in the value field settings, and we're going to go to the number format button. Now we want to change this to a currency. On the ribbon, click on Pivot Tools Design, and we're going to pivot style medium 10. And rename this Daily Receipts Pivot Table. And rename the worksheet to Daily Receipts Pivot Table. Alright, we're on to page EX316, and we're going to create and format a pivot table, a pivot chart. We're going to create and format a pivot chart. Now remember, a pivot chart requires a pivot table. A pivot table requires a data source. So our pivot chart is going to be based on either the daily receipts pivot table or the weekly summary pivot table. More than likely, we're going to be creating one for each. Alright, so we're going to select the daily receipts pivot table. Just click on any cell in the range and go on the ribbon, click the Pivot Tools and Analyze button, and we're going to do in the Tools group, click the Pivot Chart. Tools, Pivot Chart. If necessary, we're going to want to click on the clustered column if it hasn't already chosen it for you. And hit OK. Now we have a nice little column chart created off the pivot table. The pivot table is created off the pivot table data, which is the cash receipts. Now we do have to modify this chart, add a couple elements and that kind of stuff. So in the chart, we're going to add up, and we're going to put in a legend. We want to remove that legend. And we're going to edit some text in the title. And we're going to do cash receipts by day. And of course, we want this to be the orange accent too. So we're going to click on any of the columns in the chart, come up to the fill button, where's my area format, and we're going to change to orange accent 2, and we want it to be orange. There we go. And we're going to drag the pivot chart so it's in cell D3. It's up here, D3, Alt, pops it into place. Next, we're going to filter this pivot chart. Remember, to filter the pivot chart, you have to filter the pivot table. So we're going to click on the row labels, and we're going to get rid of Sunday and Saturday. Modifies the pivot chart because you modified the pivot table. Let's go back to our cell A1. And look at figure 548. Now we're into our last steps here. So we should have a couple different, we should have a documentation, a weekly summary pivot table, a daily receipts pivot table, and a cash receipts. Now I know I got this unnecessary sheet 2, so I'm just going to delete it. Okay. Last thing, make sure you save your document and upload it to me. Alright guys, remember, the big parts of this are, you need a data range. With your data range, you can create a pivot table. With the pivot table, then you can create pivot charts. If you want to edit anything in the pivot chart that requires data, you have to either filter using the pivot table or add or remove records using the data table. Alright? If you have any questions, email me, send me a discussion board, whatever you need. Alright, good luck guys.